Good evening and welcome to I'm Listening Live. I'm Listening is a 24/7, 365 initiative that works to destigmatize mental health, and that's what we're doing here, trying to get people familiar, talking about, hearing about, and processing their mental health. COVID is a difficult time, and we're all doing the best to get through it, but centering our mental health and prioritizing it is how we're going to get through this with the most resilience. Got a great show planned for you, but before we get to our guests, I want to just talk about the basic levels of functioning that we should be addressing so that we can have the most robust mental health. I talk to nauseam on Loveline about the trifecta. It's self-care, it's pleasure, and it's rest. And if we are centering and prioritizing those three things every single day, that's not only going to give us the best foundation upon which to deal with everything else that's going on in our lives that might feel anxiety-inducing or chaotic, but it's also going to help us prevent having a lot of negative outcomes as a result of what's happening with COVID. I also want to say to everyone, now more than ever, we definitely need to get involved in the election. So if you haven't registered to vote, please do so now, and we can mail in those ballots. I know a lot of people in my world have some frustrations with the two candidates, but remember, no one is perfect, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to be our best bet at creating the kind of culture and the kind of nation that we all collectively want to have. So make sure you are registered to vote and get your ballot and get it in as soon as possible. Let's now switch gears and go to our first guest, Ravi Patel, host and creator of Ravi Patel's Pursuit of Happiness. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, man, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I always start by asking people about their mental health. How is yours doing right now?
Oh, I bet you're getting the best answers ever right now. Volatile, inconsistent.
Yep, those are the buzzwords.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, on the one hand, the forced dormancy has been really awesome. Being home, spending this much time with the family, the hostility happening in the world and the heartbreak and suffering, that's been a little stressful. And I would say right now, one thing that this whole moment in time has really done for me is created a bit of a relapse in terms of all my worst mental tendencies. And so I also feel like, mentally I have work to do in terms of improving my focus and productivity and general awareness.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you for the vulnerability. I think that's what's coming up for a lot of people, right? We don't have access to a lot of the forms of maybe self-care or the buffers or the distractions, and we're kind of just like left with self.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm staying busy. And of course, the bar's high for me because I'm an expert. But having said that, I'm doing my work. Like, one of the things I'm telling people to focus on, I'm kind of calling it like the trifecta, is self-care, pleasure, and rest. And so as much as I sometimes want to push myself, I'm letting myself do a lot of resting. Are you resting?
Yeah, I would say I'm hitting the last two really hard.
Okay.
Lots of ice cream and alcohol. Really got back into poker in a big way. I'm super talented there.
Wow.
In the kitchen as well, lots of cooking, and I'm sleeping really well. Self-care, I probably need to get back in the game at some point soon. Things have gotten a little out of hand, or at least that's what my wife has been telling me lately.
Listen to your wife. She's holding up that mirror and let you learn a little bit about yourself. So listen. So I wanted to talk about the pursuit of happiness. It was either something that came out of that or it was an interview, but I was laughing because somewhere along the lines it was said that you essentially went from being an investment banker to a quote unquote bad son because apparently in your family, acting in the biz just wasn't really well received.
Well, I don't know that it's any parent's dream to take on something that's that likely of leading to suffering. No, it's not that my parents weren't like that stereotypical, unsupportive immigrant family. They were just scared for me. And I think conversely, they were just absolutely shocked that I had this great job, which, by the way, I didn't deserve. I kind of like lied and cheated my way into that job in the first place.
Attaboy.
But I didn't belong there. I mean, I was terrible at it. I was not motivated. And, that I really credit that experience to the next phase of my life, which is realizing that I really only operate well when I'm, somehow fulfilled or connected to what I'm doing.
Yes. That is literally the work I do. I think if I had to put everything I do as a therapist into a nutshell, it'd be that, help people find lives that just have meaning and value in them.
Yeah, but that's privilege that we
It's
even are
true.
in that position. Most people are just trying to put food on the table, and I know that I'm in the top 1 percentile, just that I get some fulfillment out of what I do, and I try to remember that I'm lucky.
Yeah, and so I guess we'll come back to the four-part series. Let's talk about This Saves Lives. You kind of segued us in. I think that's really beautiful. I'm always advocating for people with any privilege or platform or power to do something meaningful with it. So tell us a little bit about how that came to be.
Thanks, man. This Saves Lives is a snack company that I co-founded with some of my actor friends, Todd Grinnell, Ryan Devlin, Kristen Bell. And really, it started out of a shared mission to help alleviate severe acute malnutrition, which claims the lives of 20 million kids under the age of 6 every year. A child dies every 10 seconds. But there's some real cutting edge malnutrition aid that has been developed. And we were introduced to it through a 60 Minutes piece that we saw Anderson Cooper do. And we wanted to figure out a way to provide more of these meal packets that are prescribed to kids who are days away from potential death. And they take just this packet twice a day for 8 to 10 weeks. And more often than not, it brings them back. But they're super expensive. So we had this idea of, what if we come out with a healthy snack, a healthy granola bar, to hopefully alleviate the unhealthy snacking epidemic here in the States. And every time someone buys one of those, we donate a meal packet to a child in need somewhere around the world. And we started that thing out of my apartment in Venice Beach, LA, probably 8 years ago. And now we're in every Starbucks in the country. We've donated hundreds of thousands of meal packets, tens of thousands of kids' lives have been saved.
That's
It's
huge.
been,
Well done.
yeah.
I'd had the bar before. I never was aware that you were involved. I wasn't actually even aware of the full backstory. I'm one of those people where if I see a product and I know that money is somehow donated or something's connected to it, I'm always one of the first people to purchase it, even if I don't need it, because I love that value. But I didn't know that was you behind it. Well done.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, look, it's not just me. We've been very fortunate. So many people along the way who are just like-minded, and honestly, people like yourself, people who are just attracted to the cause, and it's opened so many doors. And we've just had so many mentors and friends who've just made connections along the way. It's truly been an incredible group effort, and not to sound cheesy, but it's given me way more than I've given it.
And let's connect that back to your four-part series, Ravi Patel's Pursuit of Happiness. I know that in your show, you hit a bunch of topics, ones that I work with a lot as well: work-life balance, aging, gender roles, parenting. Is in your pursuit of exploring happiness and dissecting it, did you land at all with the idea, not just that meaning's important, but also what you just said about the bars? Are those connected?
You mean, did I land on the idea that the pursuit of happiness itself is something that's worthwhile? Is that what you're
Oh,
asking?
well, that's a good one. Let's answer that first.
Well, look, man, I don't really know the answer to that question. I can tell you, I was listening to, God, I must sound like such a hippie, but I was listening to Michelle Obama's podcast, the one that just came out, and her and Barack were talking about how the one thing they wish they could teach people is how good, how selfishly beneficial it is to give. And that's something that I owe, to my parents. They've taught me that at a young age, the importance of community. And so I know how good it feels to improve the lives of the people around you. On a selfish level, it makes me happier. And so I've just noticed that, like, when I'm helping put smiles on the faces of, like, my wife or my daughter or my best friends, we're having fun together. Like, that is the thing that gives me the greatest joy in life. So really, this isn't a show about a guy who's got, like, some near midlife existential crisis. It's really just, I think, something that so many of us are concerned with right now, which is we have so many choices with how we spend every minute of our day and every life decision, more than any generation before, just because of technology and how connected we are. And so I think all of us are trying really hard to make not only better choices, but to make right choices, and also know which choices to not deal with. Like, it's just as important to make the right choices as it is to avoid the clutter.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, I liked the energy of the way I felt watching your show, because I like what you said, it wasn't born out of a midlife crisis, and you could feel that there wasn't like a desperation. It was more like an explorative piece, and I was able to laugh. I mean, your family's amazing, but I liked what you said about community and collectivity, because I think that's where we need to go, is to consider more impact on others, because the American dream, as far as I was raised to believe, is very, very much focused on what I can get, what I need. It can be a little self-obsessed, and so I like that bridge of others matter, or impact on others matter, but it's okay if we maybe start with the point of what can it bring us, as long as we're pushing forward.
Yeah, and really, look, on a practical level, I had an opportunity to have my own show where I get to travel somewhere, and I just was trying to think, okay, like, what's a show that I would want to keep doing?
Right.
Like, and really, the premise of the show, for anyone who's listening, is like, every episode I travel with someone in my life, and we have some big question, and it can't, out of a practical level, it's like, if this show is going on forever, I want it to be with people in my life as opposed to travel by myself. And the reason why we're also always dealing with a big question is because I'm pretty much always urgently trying to answer those questions. And I'm also not an expert in literally anything. So that was the one thing that I thought I could do, which is like, okay, well, I'm pretty good at just like being myself and being, super curious and laughing along the way. I mean, what we try to do at the show is try to make it feel like a buddy comedy, like I hope one of the things that really comes across when people watch a show is that I try really hard to be really honest and authentic on camera, vulnerable is the word you used earlier. And also I tried really hard to make this thing fun so that it's just entertaining. And that was really a testament to the team that put the show together, and also the people that I went on. We just laughed a lot, and it was a good time, and I hope that came across.
It definitely did. And what a radical act of self-worth and self-esteem for you to say, if I'm going to commit to a project, I want it to be something that has meaning and value for me and that I'm going to enjoy. Because I think a lot of us sadly accept sometimes that career has to be something that makes us miserable. And you used the word choices earlier. And I know we don't all have access to the same choices, but if you do, try to lean into that piece.
Well, you know what, man? Whenever you're trying to do hard stuff, it's really hard not to focus on the goal, the ends.
Right.
And I only know that now the ends are irrelevant, and it's all about enjoying the day and the process, because I did the other thing for most of my life. I have been pretty achievement obsessed my whole life, and kind of when I became a father recently, I realized how that was actually kind of vapid. It wasn't a real, and it was also forward looking. I was just like working my way towards this future that really would always be getting pushed further away. And now that I'm in my 40s, I'm like, you know what? I'm not only am I more focused on just wanting to spend time with my daughter and my wife, but also just aware of my mortality. So I had to figure out, like, how can I have fun every day? And it really requires recircuiting yourself to saying, okay, how can I make the pursuit, the process, enjoyable? It's a hard thing to do.
I love that, though. It's like the content matches the process, because, and answer this, but like you just kind of said, if we're so focused on getting somewhere, we miss out on the happiness that can be here with us now or in the journey. And would you say that's what doing the show left you with, is the idea that like it's an ever going open system?
Well, I mean, I think it's funny because a lot of people ask me, like, they have some expectation that the show is going to give you answers in life. And it's like, look, I don't have, I'm sorry to say I have no answers. All I can do is in each episode, we're pursuing this topic. We have these experiences, we have these conversations, and maybe we have some revelations. I know for me, every episode was definitely a life-changing journey, but not because it was conclusive, but because it was the beginning or the advancement of an important conversation. And I just hope that by me doing that in earnest, that hopefully it helps others do the same.
It does. It does. And it did for me, even though I'm someone who works with the topics you covered thus far. I think that's what the work is really about. And I know people will come to me as a therapist and they'll say, make me happy. And you
Yeah.
kind of just called out what the goals in therapy are, which is we're going to have conversations. We're going to maybe never get anywhere, but we're going to be in the process, and you have to find value in that exploration.
Totally. Wait, did you watch all of them? Which ones did you watch?
I saw the first two, assuming that what I got was in a chronological order.
Mexico with my parents, the retirement and aging one.
Yes.
And Japan with my wife.
Yes.
Okay. By the way, my wife is a therapist.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're big therapy fans.
Good.
Over here. It's hard being married to y'all though. It's a lot.
I own that. I own that. I'll jokingly say to
dude.
people, imagine being in a relationship with me.
Oh no, it's a nightmare because you can't win. It's like, okay, I get it. There's like a bibliography for every conversation I get, and I can't win. I'm not reading the books. I don't have sources.
Let me tell you something. Someone lovingly once said, Dr. Chris, you'd make a good sociopath because you can rationalize literally anything. And I said, that's true. I use it for good, though. I use it for good.
Well, out of the two that you saw, did you have a favorite, or did you have a moment that reminded you of your own life?
Well, it's kind of corny. What it really did was remind me of how much I miss my family and spending time with them, because I just got to watch you participate with them and then participate with you. And there was such a sweetness to that, even when it wasn't centered around that. And so it reminded me of the value of family and missing them.
Well, especially during the pandemic. One thing that has been really illuminating during this time is just, it's really helped me reprioritize family and community. Like my neighborhood, for example, I wasn't necessarily home to begin with, but now all of a sudden the pandemic, it's like you see people outside on their bikes with their families. They're running, and you're like, oh, this must be what neighborhoods used to have been like back in the 50s and 60s, where you see your neighbors and they're with their family and they're out there doing stuff. And it made me yearn for that regularly moving forward. I mean, that's the thing that I'm going to try to carry on with me. And also just prioritizing spending time with my family instead of making work fit my life. Instead of making life fit my work, I think this has been an illustration of like, I can kind of make work fit my life 100%. Until I run out of money.
And then you got to flip that balance. But I think that is.
And then I'll be like, that was so stupid. Whose idea was this?
I mean, that's my working definition of mental health, right? Is prioritizing the things that are going to kind of nourish us. And although work can sometimes do that, it's not always the case. And like you just said, also community care. I want that to come out of this as well. Ravi Patel, thank you so much for being a part of the show. And also thank you for everything you're doing.
Hey, thanks for everything you're doing, man. And thanks for helping me get the word out. I really appreciate it.
Always. Have a great night.
Okay.
Bye-bye. All right. So I love discussions about happiness because I think it's a really misunderstood topic or theme. And I think people think that it's an end result. It's a destination. And once we're there, we're always going to be there. And Robbie's work really helps us remember that it's a path, it's a journey, and to find meaning in that itself. Now let's go to author Bina Venkataraman, the author of The Optimist Telescope. How are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm great. Thank you. It's nice to be with you. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Absolutely. So your book had a lot of big topics. And what was interesting is they hit a lot of things that I personally have a lot of concern around. And so, re-encountering some of these topics, especially in the time of COVID, for me personally was an interesting journey. But I want to give you a congrats. Best book of 2019 by NPR. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It always feels good when you put your work out there and it gets some good feedback. So what led you to want to write a book like this?
Well, part of it was just curiosity about this basic question. I think it's so hard for me in my own life to get ahead of what's coming down the pike, so to speak. So I had a tick bite that I ignored until it became a horrible infection and Lyme disease infection once. But extrapolating that, I was working on climate change policy in the White House several years ago and found that business leaders and communities had a lot of trouble thinking ahead. And so I sort of just wondered, is this actually something that's impossible in human nature, that we're just cursed to being short-sighted and driven by immediate gratification? Or is there actually a way we can learn to think ahead and to think about the future and value our own future and do right by our future selves? And as I started probing that question over the course of 5 or more years, visiting people all over the world, talking to poker players, talking to fishermen in rural Mexico, talking to psychologists and archaeologists and economists, what I came to find was that, in fact, our ability to think ahead is not ingrained in our nature, that we're able to, through the environments we choose, the norms we choose, the tricks and tools that we use, we're able to actually think about the future much more than we might expect.
Well, the example you used in the beginning of your book with the tick bite, I related to that so well. And I think a lot of us do in America, right? Where it's all about working hard and keeping your eye on the prize. And I think a lot of us struggle sometimes to prioritize self-care. And I know I have a laundry list of my version of things I need to go to the doctor or see an expert about, but we tend to kind of push that aside for some of these more primary needs. So how do we get people to think so far ahead, so far maybe even beyond what their generation will encounter about things like climate change?
It's really difficult because our imaginations are required to think about the future. If you think about it, everything that's in your present reality, you can smell it, you can touch it, you can taste it, you can see it. And so you're taking it in with your senses. And to actually be able to think about the future means that you're taking an imaginative leap. You are doing something that maybe no other species does. We're not quite sure, which is to conjure the future in your mind. And so it's actually difficult to do that. And I think part of what we have to do is twofold. One is to tune down the noise of the present. So you have a to-do list. Everyone has a to-do list, whether it's literally on paper or in their minds on a daily basis, things they need to get done right away, things that give them that immediate sense of satisfaction, the incoming messages you're getting on your phone or your email. And you can't actually adequately take account of what's in the interest of your own long-term goals when you're constantly tuned into those short-term goals. So one thing that we need to do and could do in our personal lives, for example, is to carve out times of the day where we ignore some of those short-term goals, short-term responses. Maybe at the beginning of your day, take a period of time to work on long-term goals. But it also means bringing into greater vividness the future. So much of what lies in the future, whether it's something that could happen if you don't go to the doctor, you neglect your personal health issues, is not fathomable to us if it hasn't happened to us before or hasn't happened to someone we know who's close in our lives. And so we need to be able to conjure that future and imagine it more vividly. And this goes for everything from your own aging to climate change. So how do we make those possible futures more vivid? Well, one way is to, for example, write a letter to your future self. Write a letter to yourself 30 years in the future, or to a future child or niece or godkid, and try to imagine the reality that that person faces, whether it's your future self or someone else, and paint a picture of that. And that's a sort of practice of imaginative empathy that has been shown to help people try to grapple with problems that are very long term. Now, one of the challenges is that when we think about problems like climate change or even the future of this pandemic, for example, we tend to focus on the sort of negative impacts because those are what are being predicted. If we stay our current course with emissions, if we stay our current course with in terms of the spread of COVID-19, we're not in great shape. And it's really important for, just in terms of human psychology, for us to be able to imagine futures not just as dystopic, but as scenarios where we actually can take actions and have agency to control different outcomes. So it helps when you imagine future scenarios to imagine what you could do differently in your own life or in your own neighborhood, in your own family, and think about how those decisions might influence that outcome, whether it's about, how can you be a contributor by voting, how you vote to climate change, or whether it's about how could I save just a little bit more so my future could be different? And those kinds of imaginative exercises can be really helpful in how we think about the future.
I loved the word imaginative empathy because I think that's something that we're being called upon right now, whether, like you said, it's with COVID or voting. We have, I believe, in America, there's this toxic form of individualism where I think we've been raised to look out for ourselves or our family or our state or our country. And I love that idea that you're kind of calling forth, which is we have to kind of think beyond that, beyond ourselves, but also beyond this current moment. How do you think we're doing with that?
It's very mixed. I think if you talk to a lot of people about what they value the most in their lives, a lot of people who are parents or grandparents will tell you it's their kids or their grandkids. I'm not a parent, but I'll tell you that one of the most important things to me is to leave a world or to have a connection and do things of value for my nieces. And so if you talk to people about their aspirations, I think that they actually do value future generations. They do think beyond themselves. But the gap comes in how to actually make decisions that are in light of those aspirations and those values. It's really difficult to do because we have so many demands on our time, so many temptations, so many reasons to privilege the present over the future that seem really urgent in that moment. And so part of what I write about in the Optimist Telescope is how do you get your aspirations for to do right by the future to match with the reality of the decisions you make every day? And one of the solutions to just speak to the beautiful point you made is to not think of this as only an individual problem or an individual solution, that it actually takes communities and in environments where we are reinforced to think about the future. If you have a group of friends where you check in with each other regularly about your long-term goals, what are you doing about this long-term goal? What are you doing about climate change? That can be very reinforcing for people to actually care about those issues.
I love that. And I think what you said earlier dovetails right in, which is I know to nauseum, till people that will follow my work are probably sick of hearing this, but I keep saying what we need now and in general is to rest and to slow down. And I think, as you pointed out earlier, it's in those spaces that creates that we can be imaginative and speculative. And so I think it serves both purposes.
I totally agree with that, Chris. It's so interesting because people will say to me, "You're a person who thinks about the future. You're interested in long term thinking. What about being in the present moment and being here now?" And I actually think the two are very compatible. So the problem and the space that a lot of us occupy often in our preoccupations, in our cognitive sort of focus, is the immediate future. How do I meet that next deadline? How do I get that next project done? What am I going to do tomorrow? What is next week going to look like, perhaps? But that space is a space both that, for one, induces anxiety and is difficult for us to inhabit. But it also disconnects us from both observing our present reality and whatever might be valuable or beautiful in that moment, but also prevents us from just sort of taking that moment to daydream and be able to imagine and speculate about the future, which is really important for how we can conjure possible futures and plan for them.
That's right. And that's the only space from which, the word choice can be brought forward, right? Realizing that we have choices and that our choices matter.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that's choice is such an important way of thinking about the future. So a lot of people will kind of say, I can't think about climate change or I can't think about the future. I just can focus on the present. And they have good reasons for that. And part of it is that when they think about the future, they only think about situations that are out of their control. They might think about disasters like storms or sea level rise. If they're thinking about climate change in the current context of COVID-19, they might think, I don't know what the fall is going to look like when there's flu season, and I have no control over the political situation. I have no control over whether there's going to be a vaccine. I have no control over how people are behaving in different places or even in my own neighborhood. And so their minds can kind of spiral to that sort of the negative future. And I think the idea of choice allows you to look at the future with a clearer sense of what's possible. So I tell people to use a technique called perspective hindsight, which I write about in the Optimist Telescope, which involves imagining scenarios not just as if the scenario goes horribly wrong. That's one approach, and it's necessary if you're the kind of person who's always optimistic, no matter what. It's important to have negative scenarios. But for those of us who are thinking things are really going badly, it's important to imagine, what if everything went right? Imagine a scenario a year from now where everything went right. And ask yourself what decisions you can make, what decisions your community can make, what decisions your sort of sphere of influence can affect that can contribute to that positive outcome. How and why did that positive outcome happen in your imagination? It might have to do with everything from how you voted to how you brought together community. And it might have to do with how you actually grew to be more resilient or grew to be more wise or strong through your experiences of hardship.
So beautifully said, because regardless of what we do, next year is going to happen and arrive. And as you're calling out, we get to decide what next year might get to look like for us and everyone else. And so, make those decisions. The Optimist Telescope. I just love that title. What a beautiful metaphor. But thank you for the book you wrote. It was so inspiring for me. And thank you for being a part of our show.
Thank you so much for having me on for a conversation, Chris.
Have a beautiful night.
You too.
All right, y'all, that is our show. And we'll be back next week on Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. And you can check out all past episodes on the radio.com handles. That's Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you need extra resources or support, we're going to put up some numbers and websites at the end of the show. As always, thanks for hanging out with me, and you all have a beautiful, beautiful night.